Yesterday, the Federal Court of Appeal quashed construction approvals for the project after finding there wasn't enough consideration of the pipeline's impact on marine life, and the court said the government didn't meet its obligation to meaningfully consult with Indigenous people. Notley is now calling on the feds to appeal the court decision and to call an emergency session of Parliament to handle the issue. So, if the government complies with her demands, will Alberta get back on board with the climate plan? Alberta Premier Rachel Notley is in Edmonton. Hi, Premier Notley. Nice to see you again. Thanks for coming on the show.
Good to see you.
So, Premier, why do you think an appeal to the Supreme Court is the best path forward here?
Well, actually, it's one of the paths forward. Quite frankly, what we have to do is change the current situation. The implications of the Federal Court of Appeal decision as it stands now, left unresponded to, means that we're way too close to being in a position where we simply will not ever be able to get a pipeline to Tidewater, or frankly to do other major projects that involve moving non-renewable resources in a significant new way off of Canadian coastlines. So it needs to be addressed.
So I'm just confused, though, because are you saying that that the federal government should comply with the ruling and address the two issues that the court specifically points out, or make an appeal to the Supreme Court? And do you think making that appeal would be a faster route to getting the pipeline built than just complying with what the court said?
Well, honestly, we're still getting advice on whether, in fact, the federal government, or whether it's advisable for the federal government to engage in a two-track process. But, I think that the difficulty is, we do believe that they need to provide to the Indigenous communities the level of consultation and accommodation that they deserve. But that in and of itself should not be something that ultimately kills the project overall. However, this idea of starting back from scratch with respect to the NEB it's just too much, and there's just too much uncertainty, and we just have no idea how long that would possibly take. So we think that in addition to considering an appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada, the federal government should also be looking at legislative solutions with respect to the process around the NEB. Quite honestly, it was broken. It's a bit of a heavy-handed approach, but quite frankly, it's needed in order to fix the mess that was effectively created by the Harper government.
But are you saying then that the NEB should not take into account the impact of the increased tanker traffic on marine life in the area?
I think that the issue of how you address the impact of this kind of tanker traffic on marine life needs to be addressed, but it doesn't mean that you start the whole process over again, which is effectively what's being recommended through a reading, in our view, of the Court of Appeal decision. To be clear, the tanker traffic coming in and out of Burrard Inlet represents about 2% of the tanker traffic. And the other 98% of the tanker traffic coming in and out of Burrard Inlet does not require 6 or 7 or 8 years of review and hearings in order for it to happen. And the fact of the matter is that our energy industry is one of our most profitable industries, with one of our most profitable exports to the whole country. And we have to find a way to export it out of our country without relying on the good graces of the United States.
So if the government does comply with your demands, 1, appealing the decision, and 2, recalling an emergency session, is that good enough for you to sign back onto the federal climate plan?
Absolutely. If we get this back on track and we see that there's real action going forward to get this pipeline back on track so that we can actually see a way and a path to getting it built, then of course we'd be right back there. We've always said taking action on climate change is fundamentally important, but it must be paired with strong economic planning, strong economic fundamentals, because quite frankly, you can't do one without the other. You can't throw working people under the bus in order to achieve one outcome, just as you can't pursue economic objectives to the exclusion of understanding the need to be responsible on the environment. But as things stand now, we cannot sign on to the additional asks of the federal climate plan without getting a pipeline to Tidewater. It is just not it's not a climate change plan that will work.
I just want to be clear, though, what are the parameters for you to then go back onto the plan? Is it that they comply exactly with those two demands, or is it that construction starts on the pipeline? what is it?
Well, we'll have to look into it in more detail once we've had a chance to analyze the decision. But in effect, what we need to do is make sure that we have a certainty around the pipeline getting built and there being a beginning point and an end point. Quite frankly, as things sit right now, our view of the interpretation of the Federal Court of Appeal decision is that we have no way of knowing if this will ever get done. And that's not acceptable.
What does, though, Premier, your province pulling out of the climate plan actually accomplish? I ask because your climate plan is actually in step with the federal plan until 2021, where instead of raising the carbon price to the federal level of $40, you'll just keep it at the current $30 price. So isn't it kind of an empty threat until then?
I don't really think so. I mean, time flies in that respect, and the federal government needs to know if we're on side or if we're not on side. And quite honestly, it comes down to this fundamental issue: will this climate plan work? I mean, combating climate change is very, very important. Having a sound, thoughtful, well-balanced climate change plan that can reach objectives while at the same time accommodating the need to support working people and support economic prosperity is important. And moving to $40 or $50 is fundamentally flawed if the province of Alberta cannot move its major commodity to Canadian ports. And so the two are tied hand in hand. It's a couple years away, yes, but as we see, you have to start understanding and planning for these things in advance. And I think it is important, and it is part of an overall approach.
Sorry to interrupt, pardon me. But aren't you also making the same argument that your critics in the province have made towards your climate plan? I mean, you said you needed a carbon tax or a price on carbon because that's what's necessary to get a pipeline built. That's the exact same thing the federal government is saying, and now you're saying that their argument needs to be fought.
No, I mean, first of all, our climate leadership plan, to be clear, was something that we brought in as the government of Alberta before this government was even elected. And certainly we weren't at that point expecting that that's what was going to happen had there been a conservative government re-elected. We brought in our climate leadership plan for a number of reasons, because it's the right thing to do, and because we needed to support our energy industry as they developed and adopted more and more sustainable practices, diversified their work, diversified our energy industry as a whole, all those things. So that's what our plan was about. But signing on to the additional demands of the federal climate plan, a conversation that started soon after, that was where we said, okay, well, in order to do that, as Canada's biggest emitter and Canada's biggest energy producer, and of course the single per capita contributor to Canada's economy, that we needed to be able to pair that with a strategy that would get us full value for our resources. That means getting our pipelines, getting our product to Canadian Tidewater and through Canadian Tidewater. And